walk the same streets as you do, but I stopped at the doors with no numbers. Another day, another shadow. Welcome to the diaries. Lock your door. Let's go.
The kitchen smelled of rosemary and regret. I stood at the stove, stirring a reduction that had stopped reducing 10 minutes ago, watching the window above the sink turn from amber to violet as the October sun bled out over Oak Park. 8 years. 8 years of Thursdays that tasted like this. Time and waiting. The sound of a key in the lock that I had learned to anticipate not with joy, but with a kind of exhausted relief, like the end of a long sentence I had forgotten how to punctuate. David would come home. He would kiss my cheek. He would ask about my day, and I would say something about the registrar's office at the community college, about misplaced transcripts and students who cried in the hallway, and he would nod while checking his phone, and we would eat in the silence we had cultivated like a houseplant we were too tired to water anymore. The garlic turned bitter in the pan. I didn't care. I was 34, and I had stopped counting the months after the third round of fertility treatments failed. The doctors in downtown Chicago had gentle voices and expensive parking garages, and they spoke to me in the hushed tones usually reserved for terminal diagnoses, unexplained infertility, as if my body were a mystery novel with the last 10 pages torn out. David had stopped coming to the appointments after the first year. Not because he didn't care, but because he cared in a way that made him useless, standing in the corner of examination rooms with his hands in his pockets, looking at the floor, the ceiling, anywhere but at me, naked from the waist down under fluorescent lights that made my skin look like something already dead. The phone rang. Not my cell, the landline, the one we kept because David's mother, Helen, still believed that real emergencies announced themselves through copper wires. I let it ring 3 times before picking up. My hand slippery from olive oil. Claire. My sister's voice. Margot. The same voice that had once convinced me to cut our mother's hydrangeas to sell at a lemonade stand when we were 9. The same voice that had whispered through the dark of our shared childhood bedroom that she would never let anyone hurt me. The same voice that now, at 34, carried a bright, dangerous lilt that made me grip the receiver tighter. "I'm in town," she said. "For a week. Maybe 2. I thought I could stay with you. If you'll have me." I looked at the reduction, now blackening at the edges. "Of course," I said. "When?" "Tonight." She arrived at 8:30, her ancient Volvo wheezing against the curb like a dying animal. I watched her from the front window, the porch light catching the dust in her dark hair. The same hair as mine, the same cheekbones, the same narrow wrists that our mother had always said looked like they belonged to a saint in a Renaissance painting. But Margot moved differently. She moved like someone who had never learned to apologize for taking up space. When she stepped out of the car, she stretched her arms above her head, and her spine cracked audibly, and she laughed at the sound, alone in the dark. And I felt something in my chest tighten with an emotion I couldn't name. Love? Yes, but also something darker. Something that tasted like the garlic in the ruined pan. David was already upstairs. He had eaten silently, complimented the meat though it was overcooked, and retreated to his study with a scotch and his laptop. He had not asked about the phone call. He had not asked about my sister. He had not asked about anything in so long that I had begun to wonder if the questions had simply dried up, like a well in a drought, or if he had found answers elsewhere that made my answers irrelevant. Margot hugged me on the porch. She smelled like eucalyptus and cigarette smoke, and the vanilla shampoo we had both used as teenagers because our mother bought it in bulk at the Sam's Club in Skokie. She smelled like the before. Like the version of me that had not yet learned to measure a marriage in the number of times 2 people touched by accident in a hallway. "You look thin," she said, holding my shoulders at arm's length, her eyes, my eyes, scanning my face with an intensity that made me want to turn away. "You look like me," I said, and it came out wrong, bitter, and she laughed that bright laugh again. "Inside the house, Claire, it's freezing out here." She brought one bag, a canvas duffel that looked like it had been through wars. She set it down in the hallway, and it made a soft thud against the hardwood. And I thought of the suitcases I had packed and unpacked in hospital waiting rooms, the overnight bags for procedures that had yielded nothing but bruises and bills. We sat in the kitchen. I made tea, chamomile, because Margot had always claimed it cured everything from heartbreak to hangovers, and she sat at the island, spinning a ceramic mug that David's mother had given us for our wedding, one of dozens of beige, inoffensive objects that had colonized our house like a benign fungus. "How is he?" she asked, not looking at me. "Fine," I said. "Busy. The firm's taking on a new environmental case. He's focused." "And you?" I watched the steam rise from my cup. "I'm here." Margot reached across the island and took my hand. Her fingers were cold. Her nails were bitten down, painted a chipped burgundy that I would never have worn, not because I didn't like the color, but because David preferred neutrals, and after 8 years, preferences had a way of becoming laws. "You're unhappy," she said. It wasn't a question. "I'm accustomed," I corrected, but the word felt hollow, a bell with no clapper. We talked until midnight. Not about the important things, never about the babies that wouldn't come, the silences that had grown teeth, the way David's hand had stopped finding the small of my back in the dark, but about the surface. Her gallery show in Milwaukee that had flopped. My coworker who was getting a divorce, the price of gas, the strange weather. And yet, beneath the surface, something else moved. I could feel it, like a current under ice. Margot watched me when she thought I wasn't looking, her gaze lingering on the lines around my mouth, the way I held my shoulders, the ring on my finger that I twisted unconsciously, clockwise, then counterclockwise, a nervous habit David had stopped commenting on in year 4. At 1 in the morning, she said it. "We should trade." I looked up. The kitchen was dark except for the pendant light above the island, which cast a yellow pool that made her look like a figure in a Vermeer, all shadows and gold. "What?" "Lives," she said, leaning forward, her eyes bright with something that was not quite mischief and not quite madness, but a territory between the two that I had never learned to navigate. "For a week, I'll be you. You'll be me. I'll sleep in your bed, go to your job, make your dinners. You'll go to my apartment in Evanston, wear my clothes, paint my terrible paintings. You'll be free, Claire. For 1 week, you won't be the woman who can't have a baby. You'll be the woman who doesn't want one." The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt the air leave my lungs, felt the kitchen tilt slightly, as if the house itself were considering her proposal. "That's insane," I whispered. "Is it?" She tilted her head, and the gesture was so familiar, so mirrored, that I felt a chill run down my spine. Who would know? We look exactly alike. We sound alike. I know your schedule by heart. You've told me 1,000 times on the phone. I know David takes his coffee black with 1 sugar at 6:15. I know you go to the yoga class on Tuesdays that you hate. I know everything, Claire, and you know me. You know my apartment, my routines, my boring freelance clients. We've been studying each other since birth. This is the only advantage we have. This is the only thing we can do that no one else can. I should have said no. I should have laughed it off, poured the rest of the tea down the drain, sent her to the guest room with a blanket and a warning about the radiator that clanked at 3 a.m. But I didn't. Because she had named something I had not dared to name, a desire so buried it had fossilized. The desire to step out of my own skin, to not be Claire, the barren wife, the patient woman, the one who waited by windows while the world turned without her. "What about David?" I asked, and my voice sounded strange, thick, like honey left too long in the jar. Margot smiled. It was a small smile, private, almost sad. "I'll be gentle with him," she said. "I'll be you. The best version of you. The version who isn't tired. The version who still laughs at his jokes." I thought of the way David had looked at me last month, across the table at the Italian place on Lake Street, his eyes passing over me like I was a piece of furniture he had learned to navigate around in the dark. I thought of the way he had sighed when I told him about another appointment, another test, another hope that had curled up and died in a petri dish somewhere on the Magnificent Mile. "1 week," I said. "1 week," she agreed. We shook on it, there in the amber light of the kitchen, and her hand was warm now, and I felt a thrill of terror that tasted exactly like freedom. I left on a Saturday morning before David woke. Margot stood in the doorway of our bedroom, my bedroom, and watched me pack a small bag. She was already wearing my clothes, the navy cashmere sweater I saved for special occasions, the jeans that had grown loose on my hips, the pearl earrings David had given me on our 5th anniversary. She looked more like me than I did. She had pulled her hair back in the low bun I favored, and she had scrubbed her face of makeup, and the effect was unnerving, as if I were watching myself from outside my body, a ghost haunting my own life. "Drive safe," she said, and her voice was modulated, quiet, careful, already becoming mine. I didn't kiss her goodbye. I didn't say anything about the week, about David, about the boundaries we were both pretending existed. I simply walked down the stairs, past the living room where the morning light fell in rectangles across the rug Helen had given us, past the kitchen where the smell of last night's tea still lingered in the curtains, and out into the cold October air. Her apartment was in Evanston, a third-floor walk-up above a bakery that smelled perpetually of burnt sugar and yeast. I climbed the stairs with my bag, my breath coming short, and let myself in with the key she had pressed into my palm. The space was exactly as I remembered from my last visit 2 years ago. Chaotic, alive, covered in canvases that leaned against every wall like wounded soldiers. The light was different here. Northern exposure, pale and unforgiving, falling across a bed that was unmade, a desk covered in paint tubes and receipts and empty coffee cups. There was no television. There was a record player and a stack of vinyl that looked like they had been chosen by someone who still believed music could save a person. I set my bag down. The silence was enormous. Not the silence of my house, which was heavy and expectant, but a silence that felt like a gift. Like a room that had been waiting for me to fill it or not, as I chose. For the first 2 days, I did nothing. I slept in Margot's bed, which was softer than mine, softer than anything I had slept in for years, and I woke without an alarm, and I made coffee in her tiny kitchen with the window that looked out onto an alley where a stray cat made its slow, arrogant patrol. I wore her clothes, loose linen shirts that smelled of turpentine and lavender detergent, jeans with paint on the knees, a leather jacket that felt like armor. I walked to the lake on Sunday afternoon, and the wind off Michigan was a knife, but I walked for miles, past the university students with their expensive headphones and their futures still unbroken, past the mothers with strollers who did not look at me with the pity I had grown accustomed to in Oak Park. I was not Claire here. I was nobody. I was a woman walking by the lake on a Sunday, and the simplicity of it made my eyes burn with tears I could not explain. On Monday, I went to her studio. She had given me the address, the alarm code, the list of clients who were expecting proofs for a graphic design project she was behind on. "Just send them something," she had said. "They don't know what they want anyway." I sat at her desk, surrounded by her sketches, portraits of strangers with eyes that looked too large, too knowing, landscapes that seemed to be dissolving into weather, and I opened her laptop. The password was our birthday. Of course it was. I spent the day answering emails in her voice, which was easier than I expected. We had always finished each other's sentences. Now I finished her professional obligations, typing phrases that sounded like her, breezy and slightly irresponsible, promising deliverables I knew nothing about. At 4 o'clock, I found a bottle of red wine in the cabinet and drank a glass while looking at a half-finished canvas of a woman's back. Turned away from the viewer, her spine a question mark. That night, I called David. The phone rang 3 times. I had rehearsed what I would say. I was Margot, after all, calling to check in, to be polite. But when he answered, his voice was wrong. It was warm. It was awake. "Margot," he said. "I was wondering when you'd call." Something cold settled in my stomach. "Just checking in," I said, keeping my voice light, casual, Margot's voice. How's everything?" "Good," he said. And then, after a pause that felt like a door closing somewhere in a distant room, "Really good, actually. Claire seems different, lighter. I don't know what you said to her, but thank you." I gripped the phone. "Different how?" She's present, you know? She made this ridiculous pasta last night, the kind with the cream sauce I like, and we actually talked. About nothing. About everything." She laughed, Margot. I haven't heard her laugh like that in years. I felt the room tilt. The wine in my glass looked like blood. "That's great," I managed. "I'm glad." "Are you okay?" he asked, and there was a note of concern that I had not heard directed at me in so long that I almost didn't recognize it. "You sound tired." "Long day," I said. "Give her my love." I hung up before he could say anything else. I sat in the dark of Margot's apartment, the half-finished canvas staring at me with its turned back, and I felt something shift in my chest, a tectonic plate of understanding grinding into place. She was good at being me, better than me. She had made him the pasta I had forgotten he liked. She had made him laugh. She had done in 2 days what I had failed to do in 8 years. I should have driven home that night. I should have thrown my things in the car and raced down the Edens Expressway and walked into my house and said, "It's me. I'm here. I'm back. I'm sorry." But I didn't. Because some part of me, a part I am ashamed of now, a part that was small and wounded and furious, wanted to know how long she could keep it up. How long the better version of me could last before the seams showed. So I stayed. On Tuesday, I found the journal. It was not hidden. That was the first thing that struck me. It was in the drawer beneath her bed, beneath a tangle of scarves and a box of photographs from our childhood. And when I opened it, telling myself I was looking for a sketchbook, telling myself I had every right to touch anything in this apartment because we had traded lives, because boundaries were already shattered, I found pages and pages of handwriting that was unmistakably Margot's, slanted and urgent, the pen pressing so hard into the paper that the words felt embossed. The first entry was dated 6 months ago. He looked at me today. Not the way he looks at her. The way he used to look at her. Before the silence. Before the treatments. Before the death of hope. We were at the barbecue at Helen's. He was grilling, and I handed him a beer, and our fingers touched, and he looked at me like I was a door he had forgotten he could open. I know it's wrong. I know it's poison, but I am so tired of being the sister who has nothing, the free one, the irresponsible one. The one who paints pictures no one buys while she builds a life that is collapsing under the weight of her own emptiness. I sat on the edge of the bed, the journal open in my lap, and I felt the blood drain from my face. I turned the page. She told me last month that he hasn't touched her in 6 months. Not really. Not the way a husband touches a wife. She said it like a confession, like a shame. She doesn't know that I dream about him. She doesn't know that I have memorized the way he smells, sandalwood and something else. Something sharp like ozone before a storm. She doesn't know that I would trade everything, my art, my apartment, my so-called freedom, for one night of being the one he chooses. My hands were shaking. I turned another page, and another, the entries growing more frequent, more desperate, the handwriting wilder. The plan is simple. She is exhausted. She is broken. She will agree to anything if I frame it as a gift. A week off. A week of being me. And when I am her, I will be so perfect that he will wonder how he ever lived without me. I will be the Claire he fell in love with. The one before the doctors, before the needles, before the silence. I will make him remember. And then, we will see. If I am lucky, I will leave with more than I came with. If I am not lucky, at least I will have had this. At least I will have known what it feels like to be chosen. The room was spinning. I read the last entry, dated 3 days before she arrived at my house, and the words blurred, but I made them out. Each one a nail in the coffin of something I had not known was still alive inside me. She will never know. She is too good to suspect, too tired to see. And by the time she figures it out, if she ever does, it will be too late. I will have already become her. Or she will have already become me. Does it matter, in the end? We are the same flesh, the same face. The only difference is desire, and I have so much more of it than she does. I closed the book. I sat in the dark, the bakery below having closed for the night, the silence no longer a gift, but a tomb. I thought about calling her. I thought about calling David. I thought about driving to Oak Park and walking into my house and screaming until the windows shattered. But I did none of those things, because Margot had known me better than I knew myself. She had known that I would read this journal. She had known that I would not act immediately, because acting would mean admitting that my own sister had seen me not as a person to be loved, but as a vacancy to be filled. I was still sitting there, the journal heavy in my lap like a stone, when my phone rang. It was Wednesday morning. The light had changed from black to gray, and I had not moved, had not slept, had not done anything but exist in the horror of my own naivety. The number was David's. I answered. My voice was hoarse, unrecognizable. "Margot," he said, and his voice was different now. Not warm, not awake, terrified. "Something's wrong with Claire. She's bleeding. There's so much blood. I called an ambulance, but I don't know what to do. She keeps saying she's fine. She keeps saying it's nothing. But she's white, Margot. She's so white. And I can't lose her. I can't lose another." He stopped. The silence that followed was the heaviest thing I had ever held. "Another what?" I whispered. But he had already hung up, or the line had cut, or the world had simply ended and I was too slow to notice. I drove. I don't remember the drive. I remember the Edens, the gray sky, the other cars moving like fish in a current while I swam against it. My foot heavy on the pedal, my hands numb on the wheel. I remember pulling up to the house, the ambulance already there, its lights painting the oak trees red and blue, a carnival of catastrophe. I ran up the walk. The front door was open. Helen was there, David's mother, standing in the foyer in her camel coat, her face a mask of something I could not read. She saw me, and her hand flew to her mouth, and she took a step back. "Wait," she said, her voice trembling, her eyes wide and dark and suddenly, horribly knowing. "Wait. She didn't tell you?" I pushed past her. The paramedics were in the living room, and there was a stretcher, and there was blood on the floor, dark and arterial. The kind of blood that means something has torn inside. And on the stretcher, her hair matted to her forehead, her face the color of candle wax, was Margot, wearing my nightgown, wearing my face. Her eyes were closed, but her hand was clutching something, a piece of paper, crumpled and red-stained. David was beside her, holding her hand, his face wet with tears, and when he looked up and saw me standing in the doorway, his expression did not change, because he thought I was her. Because to him, the woman on the stretcher was Claire, his wife, and the woman in the doorway was Margot, the sister, the outsider. "She's pregnant," one of the paramedics said, his voice clinical, detached. "About 8 weeks. But she's hemorrhaging. We need to move." Pregnant. 8 weeks. I did the math with a mind that felt like it was filled with static. 8 weeks. Before the switch. Before the trade. Before I had handed her my life like a gift wrapped in naivety. She had been pregnant when she proposed the exchange. She had known. She had planned it all. The pasta, the laughter, the cream sauce, the way she would slip into my bed and my body and my husband's arms. And when she left, she would leave with everything. The baby, the man, the life I had built and failed to fertilize. But something had gone wrong. The body she had stolen had rejected the life she had planted. The blood on the floor was hers, and his and mine, all mixed together, indistinguishable. They wheeled her out. David went with her, still holding her hand, still calling her Claire, still begging her to hold on, to stay, to not leave him again. He did not look back at me. He did not see me. I was a ghost in my own doorway, watching my husband leave with my sister, both of them believing she was the wife and I was the stranger. Helen stood beside me. She had not moved. Her hand was still at her mouth, and her eyes were fixed on the blood on the rug, the dark stain spreading slowly, obscenely, into the fibers. "She told me last week," Helen whispered, "at brunch. She told me she was expecting. She said she was waiting for the right time to tell you. She said she wanted to surprise you. But you're here. You're standing here. And she's on that stretcher. And I don't." She turned to me, and her face crumpled. The elegant mask of the Chicago matron dissolving into something raw and childlike. "I don't understand. Which one of you is which?" I looked at her. I looked at the blood. I looked at the space where my husband had been, where he had knelt beside my sister and wept for her as if she were me, as if the loss of her were the loss of everything he had ever wanted. "I don't know anymore," I said, and it was the truest thing I had ever spoken. They took her to Rush University Medical Center. I drove myself, the Volvo wheezing in a way that felt familial, sympathetic. I sat in the parking garage for an hour, maybe 2, watching the light change from gray to gold to gray again, before I could make my legs work well enough to walk inside. The waiting room smelled of antiseptic and despair, the same smell I had known for 8 years, the smell of hope measured in milligrams and millimeters. I found David in the surgical wing, his head in his hands, his suit jacket crumpled on the chair beside him. He looked up when I sat down, and his eyes were red, swollen, the eyes of a man who had been torn open and left bleeding in a place he did not know how to navigate. "Margot," he said, and his voice was a rasp. "She's in surgery. They said there was a rupture, an ectopic pregnancy. They had to remove—" He stopped, his throat working. "They had to remove the tube, and the babies. There were 2. Twins. She didn't even know. We didn't even know. Twins." The word echoed in the sterile hallway. The babies I had prayed for, paid for, wept for, had been growing inside my sister, in my bed, with my husband, and now they were gone. scraped out of her like a mistake, like a weed in a garden that was never mine to tend. Did she wake up? I asked. Before surgery. Did she say anything? David looked at me, and for a moment, a flicker of something passed across his face. Doubt, recognition, the ghost of a question. But grief is a powerful anesthetic, and it numbed whatever instinct might have told him that the woman beside him was not the woman he thought she was. She said she was sorry, he whispered. She said she was so sorry, and she kept saying your name. Claire. Over and over. Claire, Claire, Claire. Like she was afraid you would disappear if she stopped. I felt my heart crack, not cleanly but jaggedly, along lines that had been stressed for years. She had been sorry. My sister, the thief, the architect of my dissolution, had been sorry. But sorry does not unmake a pregnancy. Sorry does not return a husband's gaze to its rightful object. Sorry does not scrub the blood out of a marriage. I stood up. My legs were steady now, steadier than they had been in years. I walked to the window and looked out at the city, the skyline of Chicago rising in the distance like a promise no one had asked it to make. The lake was somewhere beyond, gray and infinite, the same lake I had walked beside in Evanston, believing I was free. David, I said, and my voice was my own again, not Margot's, not the careful, tired version of Claire I had been for 8 years, but something older, something forged in the fire of this particular betrayal. When she wakes up, when she comes home, I need you to look at her, really look, and I need you to tell me if you see me, or if you see her, or if you even know the difference. He stared at me. What? I found her journal, I said, turning to face him. In Evanston. She wrote everything. The plan, the desire, the pregnancy. She wanted to be me, David. She wanted my life, because hers was empty. And she thought that if she wore my skin long enough, she could grow something in it that I couldn't. And you. I paused, tasting the bitterness of the truth, letting it coat my tongue before I spoke it. You didn't know. I believe that. You thought she was me, the better me, the laughing me, the me who made pasta and touched your hand in the dark. But I need you to understand something. That woman in there is not me, and I am not sure if the woman you married is even here anymore, or if I died somewhere in the silence between the first hormone shot and the last failed test. He stood up, unsteady, reaching for me, but I stepped back. The gesture was small, but it was a wall, and he felt it. Claire, he said, and my name in his mouth sounded like a prayer and a curse. No, I said. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I'm going to sit in that chair, and I'm going to wait for her to wake up, and then I'm going to ask her why she thought my life was worth stealing. And then I'm going to decide if there's anything left to save. Not of us. Of me. I sat. He stood. The clock on the wall ticked, indifferent, marking time that no longer belonged to any of us. Hours passed. Helen arrived with coffee that went cold. Nurses came and went with faces that had learned not to ask questions. And finally, a doctor in green scrubs emerged, his mask hanging around his neck, his eyes tired in a way that suggested he had seen too many endings to believe in beginnings. She's stable, he said. She's awake. She's asking for Claire. David moved first, but I stopped him with a hand on his arm. Alone, I said. He looked at me, and I saw the war in his eyes. The husband who wanted to comfort his wife, the man who was beginning to understand that he no longer knew which wife was which. He nodded, a small, broken movement, and sat back down. I walked to the recovery room. The door was ajar, and I could see her before I entered, propped up on pillows, her face pale, her hair dark against the white sheets, her hands lying still on the blanket like abandoned things. She looked like me. She looked exactly like me, and she looked like a stranger. I pushed the door open. She turned her head, and her eyes found mine, and something in them: guilt, relief, love, fear, flared and died in the same instant. "Claire," she whispered. I stood at the foot of the bed. The room was small, claustrophobic, the air thick with the smell of medicine and loss. I looked at her, at the IV in her arm, at the hollow of her throat, where her pulse beat visibly, too fast, too fragile. "You planned it," I said. Not a question. A statement, heavy as a stone dropped into still water. She closed her eyes. Tears leaked from beneath her lashes, tracking down her cheeks, and I watched them without feeling anything, or perhaps feeling so much that my body had simply shut down, overloaded, a circuit breaker tripped. "Yes," she said. "From the beginning. From before the beginning." She opened her eyes, and they were my eyes, but they were also hers. The eyes of the girl who had once shared a bed with me and whispered that she would never let anyone hurt me. I saw him at Christmas, 2 years ago, at Helen's. He was so sad, Claire, so lonely in his own marriage, and I thought if I could just make him happy, if I could just give him what you couldn't, then maybe I would finally be the one who mattered, the one who was chosen, not the extra, not the spare. "You were never the spare," I said, but my voice was flat, because we both knew she was lying, and I was lying, and the lie had been the foundation of our sisterhood for longer than I had been willing to admit. "I was," she said. "I am. You had the house, the husband, the life that looked like a magazine, and I had paint and debt and a cat that didn't even like me. And then I found out I was pregnant, and I knew it was his. And I knew that if I told you, if I told anyone, it would be over. The baby would be taken from me, or I would be taken from you. And I couldn't bear either. So I thought. I thought if I could just be you for a little while, if I could just slip into your life like a dress, then when the time came, it would be a surprise, a miracle. Claire, the barren one, suddenly pregnant. And no one would ever know it was me. No one would ever have to know." She was crying harder now, her body shaking with sobs that must have been agony against the stitches in her abdomen, but I felt no urge to comfort her. I felt only a vast Arctic distance, as if I were standing on the shore of a frozen lake, watching someone drown in the black water beneath the ice. "But you lost them," I said. "Yes. And you lost me." She looked at me then, really looked, and I saw the moment she understood that the damage was not reparable, that the mirror between us had not merely cracked, but shattered into shards that would cut anyone who tried to pick them up. "I know," she whispered. I stood there for a long time, listening to the beep of the monitor, the distant hum of the hospital, the sound of my own breath moving in and out of a body that I was only now beginning to reclaim as mine. I thought about the divorce papers I had seen in the drawer of David's desk 6 months ago, the papers he had printed and hidden and never mentioned, the papers I had pretended not to see because seeing them would have meant admitting we were already over. I thought about the way he had looked at me, as he thought, when she made him laugh. I thought about the babies, the twins, the two lives that had never drawn breath and now never would, two ghosts that would haunt whatever remained of this family. "I'm going to sign them," I said. Margot blinked. "What?" "The divorce papers. They're in his desk. I've known about them for months. I'm going to sign them, and I'm going to leave. And you're going to stay here and explain to him why the woman he thought was his wife for a week was actually his sister-in-law." You're going to explain to Helen why she has two granddaughters who look the same, but one of them is a thief. You're going to explain to yourself in the mirror, every morning, why you have my face, but none of my life. Claire, she said, reaching for me, her hand trembling, the IV tube pulling taut. Please, I can fix this. I can. You can't, I said, and for the first time in 8 years, perhaps for the first time in my life, I felt the absolute, terrifying clarity of a truth that could not be negotiated with. There is no fixing this. There is only surviving it. And I have survived enough. I am going to walk out of this room, and I am going to sign those papers, and I am going to drive until I find a place where no one knows my name or my face, or the story of the twins who couldn't have babies, and the sister who thought she could steal one. I turned to leave. Her voice followed me, broken, raw, the voice of the girl in the dark bedroom, the voice of the woman who had planned my erasure. Claire, she said, do you hate me? I paused at the door. I looked back at her, at my face on the pillow, at the ruin of everything we had been and everything we would never be again. No, I said. I don't hate you. I don't feel anything for you at all. And that's worse, isn't it? To be nothing, to be the extra, to be the spare. I closed the door behind me. The hallway was bright, too bright, the fluorescent lights buzzing like insects. David stood up when he saw me, his face a question I no longer had the energy to answer. Helen sat beside him, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes fixed on the floor. I walked past them both. I walked past the nurse's station, past the elevator, down the stairs because I could not bear to wait for the mechanical descent. I walked out into the parking garage, into the gray afternoon, and I sat in Margot's Volvo for a long time, my forehead against the steering wheel, my breath fogging the glass. When I finally started the engine, I did not drive to Oak Park. I drove north, toward the lake, toward the place where the water met the sky in a line so thin it was impossible to tell where one ended and the other began. I drove until the city was behind me, until the houses grew sparse and the trees grew thick, until I found a road I did not know and followed it, because not knowing was the only freedom I had left. I do not know where I will stop. I do not know if I will ever go back. I know only that I am no longer the woman who waited by windows, and I am no longer the woman who could not have a child, and I am no longer the woman whose sister saw her life as a vacancy to be filled. I am something else now, something unformed, something that smells of lake water and engine oil, and the particular silence of a car moving through a landscape that does not recognize your face. The divorce papers are in my bag. I will sign them in a gas station somewhere, or in a motel room with a pen that skips, or on the hood of this car while the wind takes the sound of my name and carries it out over the water where it cannot hurt me anymore. And maybe one day, years from now, I will wake up in a bed that is mine alone, in a room that smells of nothing but my own skin, and I will look in the mirror and see a face that is only mine, unmirrored, unshared, and I will not think of her. Or maybe I will. Maybe the wound is too deep for that kind of forgetting. But even if I remember, even if I carry the ghost of my sister's betrayal like a stone in my pocket for the rest of my life, I will have this: the road, the unknown, the self that I am only now beginning to meet. The woman who finally learned that some doors once opened cannot be closed, and some lives, once stolen, cannot be returned, but the one who was stolen from can always, always walk away. The sun is setting. The sky is the color of bruised plums, of old roses, of the blood that stained my rug and my marriage, and the space between my sister's heart and mine. I press the accelerator. The Volvo groans, but it moves. It carries me forward, into the dark, into the next thing, into whatever comes after the end of the story we thought we were telling. And for the first time in 8 years, I am not afraid. Sometimes I wonder if the life I left behind was ever really mine, or if I had been wearing it like Margot wore my nightgown, loose in the shoulders, tight in the chest, borrowed and ill-fitting from the very start. Did David fall in love with me, or with the idea of a woman who could fill the silence he couldn't bear alone? Did Margot steal my husband, or did she simply reach for the love I had already let slip through my fingers like sand through the gap of a half-closed fist? And the babies, those two ghosts with my eyes and his chin, those twin hearts that stopped beating in a body that wore my face, were they the beginning of something sacred, or merely the final, irrefutable proof that nothing built on theft can ever stand? I drive until the road becomes a ribbon of ink unwinding across the dark, and I ask myself if betrayal is always a knife, or if sometimes it is a mirror held up too late, showing you the exact shape of your own neglect. Is it possible to forgive the sister who wanted to become you when you spent 8 years trying to become anyone else? Is freedom just another word for loneliness? Or is loneliness the only room spacious enough to finally hear your own voice? The lake is somewhere to my left, vast and black and indifferent, and I think about all the women who have sat in kitchens like mine, stirring reductions that turn to ash, measuring their worth in the things they could not produce: babies, laughter, desire, hope. We are taught that love is a house you build, brick by patient brick. But no one warns you that you can spend a decade laying mortar in a foundation that was never yours to begin with. That the walls can close in so slowly you mistake suffocation for shelter. Margot thought she could inherit my life because she mistook my cage for a crown. I mistook my endurance for devotion. And David, dear, lost David, mistook my absence for a problem he could solve by simply looking elsewhere. The moral is not that sisters should not trade places, or that husbands should not be tested. The moral is that you cannot pour yourself into a vessel that is already full of someone else's expectations and expect to taste anything but bitterness. The moral is that a body that does not conceive is not a broken thing, and a marriage that does not breathe is not a tomb to be decorated, but a door to be walked through. Even if the other side is only darkness, even if the only thing waiting there is the sound of your own footsteps, finally, after all these years, belonging entirely to you. I do not know if I will ever stop being angry. I do not know if I will ever stop being sad. But I know, with a certainty that settles in my bones like winter, that the woman I am becoming is not a wife, not a sister, not a tragic story whispered over coffee in Oak Park kitchens. She is something else, ungainly, uncertain, alive. And for now, that is enough. The road curves. I follow it. The questions remain, suspended in the dark like stars I cannot name, and I let them hang there, beautiful and unanswered, because some things are not meant to be solved. Some things are only meant to be survived.